That woman was framed by her stepmother's family in her previous life. After being reborn, she became everyone's beloved, with a husband who was devoted to her and obsessed with spoiling his wife. Her sister-in-law's family would shower her with affection whenever they saw her. Even the most difficult mother-in-law said, "Why don't I just give you all my property?" However, before all this, Pirii had a tragic ending in her previous life. She was just an ordinary count's daughter, neither special nor outstanding. But everything changed after she lost her parents. Her once gentle stepmother became vicious. The fiancé who had always loved her actually got involved with her sister. Pirii would never forget that day when she lay motionless in bed, like a fish on a cutting board. Her fiancé Sif held her hand tightly and said, "You should die. I'm in deep debt now. Only if you die can I inherit the property. Since you love me, you can die for me, right? Can't move, can you? That's because the curse has taken effect. Although expensive, it's the best way to eliminate someone without leaving a trace." Her stepmother laughed mockingly from the side. "Don't look at me like that. If you want to blame someone, blame your father. If he hadn't left a will saying you would inherit everything, this wouldn't have happened. What a pity, we could have been close mother and daughter." Her sister Rina asked, "Are we going to become wealthy now?" Sif looked at her with tender affection. "Of course, my little princess. You must have been suffering all this time, but today everything will end." Rina looked at Pirii's furious eyes and retorted, "You didn't really think Sif was your husband, did you? Sif only married you at my request. He's been waiting for you to die." Pirii was devastated. So everything before had been an act put on by the three of them. That loving husband, the gentle stepmother and kind sister were all just acting. At this moment, her stepmother took out a pillow. "After you die, we'll enjoy your inheritance well. Rest in peace." With that, she covered Pirii's nose and mouth with the pillow. Tears streamed down Pirii's face. "I will never forgive them." However, when Pirii woke up again, she was alive and well. She looked at everything in disbelief. This was too absurd. This woman's fate was too tragic. Not only was she deceived by her wicked stepmother's family, but also killed by their own hands. Even her fiancé was her sister's longtime lover. But who could have imagined that she, with her protagonist's halo, would be reborn? At first, Pirii couldn't distinguish what was reality. What did they mean her father had just passed away? He had been dead for over a year. Even when Pirii asked the servants, she got the same answer. And her stepmother and Rina still smiled at her as if nothing had happened. Everything was developing according to the plot in her dream. Pirii didn't know what was going on. The feeling of death had been so real she could still remember it now. Was that really just a dream, or had she gone mad? But not long after, at the same time, she experienced the same thing. Sif ran towards Pirii with flowers and a ring. He handed the ring to Pirii with a radiant smile. Pirii was extremely excited. Something incredible had happened to her. She bent down and wept with joy, not because Sif had proposed, but because she had been reborn. Although it was hard to believe, she had really returned to the past, to the time before she was betrayed. Although she didn't know why she had been resurrected, she couldn't miss this opportunity. She had to defend her life and the inheritance her father left behind. From that day on, Pirii realized one thing. She could do nothing in the Count's house. She wanted to take away everything they desired and make them regret their actions, but these were just her wishes. All she could do was reject Sif's proposal. Rejecting the proposal wasn't enough. She also needed to cut all ties with him. Her father had said in his will that all the Count's feudal lands belonged to her, but how could she manage them? Most importantly, she couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't be harmed by her stepmother in the future. Pirii suddenly remembered what Sif had said. What curse had she been under? Since her stepmother coveted the property, why would she let Sif marry her? Although she didn't know the answers. But one thing was certain, she needed time. Before she could protect herself, she needed to think of a way that could maximize her safety. Right now, she needed this man's help, Duke Tur. She needed to marry him. Under the guidance of the previous Duke of Lapalayan, the monarch had built a powerful empire. The previous Duke of Lapalayan became the first person to be granted the title of Grand Duke, and whenever the empire went to war, the Lapalayan family would charge at the front as the royal family's confidants. And the current Duke of Lapalayan is the rumored Grand Duke Tur. When the war between the empire and the Schwartz kingdom made the people suffer greatly, Grand Duke Tur led his knights to travel far and join the battle, and instantly defeated the Schwartz kingdom. Just when the entire empire was praising this hero, Tur appeared in the imperial capital covered in blood, but he left for his territory without even attending the victory celebration. After people saw his appearance, they became filled with awe and called him the bloodthirsty war maniac. Now this war maniac had come to the capital again, and this was also a good opportunity that Pirii couldn't miss. She slowly said, "The reason I came to find you is because I have a proposal. Please marry me just for 1 year." She knew this was abrupt, but she had to marry this man. Although Grand Duke Tur had previously married a lady, they divorced within 2 months. The woman who received huge compensation said Tur was the worst man, and then disappeared. He didn't care about property property, so he definitely wouldn't covet Piriai's assets. He also hadn't consummated with his wife, which showed he had no interest in women. This was exactly what Piriai needed. After hearing this, Ter asked in return, "Why do you want to marry me?" Piriai slowly said, "My family wants to harm me and take away my property." Ter fell silent. "Did you come here just to tell me this? You've already inherited the property, why worry needlessly? Go back." With that, Ter stood up to leave. However, when he passed by Piriai, she suddenly grabbed him. Ter's face immediately darkened, and he threw Piriai aside. This woman is really persistent. But his hand was accidentally cut by a ring. Piriai apologized repeatedly, extremely nervous. Had she gone mad? Why did she grab him? Ter had lost his patience now. "I don't want to waste any more time talking with you. Leave, miss." How could Piriai give up like this? "Grand Duke, you need to take a wife now, don't you?" Piriai knew why he had returned to the capital. It was because of his engagement to the princess, that is, to marry his second wife in name only. In Piriai's previous life, Ter had been forcibly recalled to the capital because the king wanted him to marry the princess, wanting to keep the capable Grand Duke by his side. Although he was divorced because he was the empire's celebrated hero, he had to marry. However, the Grand Duke strongly resisted the royal marriage. Piriai still remembered that Grand Duke who couldn't control his expressions, and the seventh princess who cried saying she hated old men. If the Grand Duke wanted to avoid this, he needed to find a woman to marry. Piriai gathered her courage and continued, "I heard the king wants you to marry the princess. You're about to marry the seventh princess who's still in school. Don't you mind? Your Grace, you need me. Just 1 year and we'll divorce immediately after." Piriai prayed in her heart, hoping Ter would agree. After a moment of silence, Ter said, "I think you're mistaken. The king is forcing me to marry the fourth princess, not the seventh princess. And I'm not that patient, so don't make me repeat myself." Watching Ter's retreating figure, Piriai became anxious. What should she do? But the more anxious she became, the dizzier she felt. Then her vision blurred and she collapsed. Her eyes were full of tears, feeling very uncomfortable. This feeling was somewhat familiar. It was exactly like when she was killed by her stepmother and the others. Was she going to die again? Night fell and there was a huge thunderstorm tonight. 2 men were digging a hole. Someone else had died so young and yet lost their life. How pitiful. However, in the next second, a black shadow emerged from the hole. The men screamed in terror, shouting that it was a witch. And at this moment, Piriai in the hole looked at her hands. What was going on? Piriai sat in the mud hole, unable to process what was happening. No matter how hard she thought, she couldn't figure out what was going on. Had she been buried alive? Meanwhile, the 2 men ran screaming to find her. "She's been resurrected. After a flash of lightning, she gained new life. She's a witch." Upon hearing this news, Ter immediately came to the mud hole. He looked down at Piriai from above. This woman really hadn't died. How was this possible? While Piriai trembled with fear, Ter had tried to kill her. Although she knew Ter was bloodthirsty, she never thought he would be this crazy. Ter muttered, "This is really strange. Why didn't you die?" Then he extended his hand, wanting to pull Piriai up. "If you don't want to be really buried alive, come out of that hole first." Piriai was confused again. Hadn't Ter intended to kill her? After calming down, Piriai understood that she had been too hasty. She had made a mistake from the moment she sought out Ter based on her past memories. Why was she experiencing these things? And she had been buried alive. This was too much. Piriai slowly spoke. "Did you try to kill me earlier?" Ter looked at Piriai. "You seemed to bite your finger just now. Is that a habit of yours?" Piriai didn't understand. So what if she did? What was the problem? Ter took off his glove. There was a streak of red on his scarred hand. "This is from when you grabbed my hand earlier," Ter continued. "Perhaps I should seriously consider your proposal." Then he took out a knife. Piriai was speechless. What did this have to do with her being buried alive? She loudly said, "The point now is, why did you bury me alive?" However, Ter didn't respond. Instead, he cut his palm with the knife. "Sorry, this matter is too important. I need to test it once more." Before Piriai could react, her nose and mouth were covered by Ter's bloody hand. Piriai struggled, but to no avail. What was he trying to do? After some time, Piriai woke up in bed. Ter was sitting by her bedside. Piriai was startled. Had she been reborn again? This was too intense, being persecuted by her stepmother and reborn, seeking the Duke's protection only to be buried alive by him. Yet surprisingly, she was reborn again. But what awaited her was death once more. When she woke up, Piriai found that Ter, who had suffocated her, was by her bedside. What was going on? Had she been reborn again? She had clearly felt that same pain of approaching death, but she hadn't died. From the Grand Duke's expression, she hadn't gone back in time. What was happening? Piriai grabbed the blanket and trembled as she spoke. "What are you trying to do? Why do you keep making me experience the pain of death? Why do I keep coming back to life after dying?" Ter slowly said, "The Lapalayan family is cursed. Anyone with this family's bloodline is born with a deadly poison, and at the same time we have strong immunity to poisons, so even if we drink ordinary poison we won't die. But even a few drops of our blood can instantly kill someone. Piri couldn't believe the Lapalayan family really was cursed. There were folk tales about the Lapalayan family being cursed, but they weren't talking about the real curse. Their family was invincible in war, leading the main force to victory. With their noble status, they rarely interacted with the outside world, and those who became involved with their family often died young. Perhaps because of this, people came to see their family's unique red pupils as an ominous sign. The so-called cursed family was just what people called them out of fear. Piri had thought there must be something else behind it, but she never imagined that the royal family's confidants were really cursed. If this was true, then her ring had been stained with the Grand Duke's blood. Then she had put the finger that touched the ring in her mouth. So that meant she had really been poisoned just now, and the Grand Duke thought she couldn't be saved, so he buried her alive? Just then, Tur spoke up. Originally when you bit that finger, I thought you were dead for sure, but amazingly you didn't die. It was the same just now. Now you know our family's secret. Piri panicked. Was he going to silence her? Tur calmly continued. Originally I rejected your proposal because of this secret, but now I have no choice. Miss, it seems you must be my wife for the next year. Killed by her vicious stepmother's own hands. Deceived in love by her sister's longtime lover. Now reborn, she would no longer be manipulated. This time she would make them pay blood for blood. Daddy will never let you suffer. After her mother's death, this was what Piri heard most often. And the reason her father suddenly brought in her stepmother and Rina was also because of this. Her sickly father was always concerned about Piri, and now the grown-up Piri was going to marry the man people called a war maniac. Just then, her enemies arrived. Her stepmother gently said, "You seem to come here often lately. How have you considered my suggestion? After all, it's too hard for you to manage the Count's mansion alone. Why don't you find a proxy to help you manage it first? Your emotions haven't settled yet, and Mom really can't bear to see you struggling alone." Piri knew perfectly well in her heart that after finding a proxy, they would send her on her way. Now things were developing exactly the same as before. Piri handed the envelope in her hand to her stepmother. After they looked at it, their faces were filled with panic. Piri smiled and said, "That's right. I've decided to marry the Grand Duke of Lapalayan, so now we're breaking up, Sif." Rina became anxious and shouted, "Sister, why have you suddenly become like this? The person you love is Sir Sif." Sif also pleaded from the side, "Did I do something wrong?" Piri didn't want to hear any more of these hypocritical words. She immediately stated that she would have her uncle who lived in the east be responsible for the proxy. Therefore, Mother and Rina could no longer live in the main house. Furthermore, she wouldn't allow any outsiders to set foot in the Count's mansion. Sir Sif, that outsider means Yub. Sif was just an ordinary knight. Now that the marriage was off, he had lost his qualification to take the Royal Knight's examination, as only nobles could take this exam. Piri left without looking back. This was just the beginning. They would lose more and more in the future. And what she needed to do now was marry Grand Duke Tur to ensure her safety. This man had a face that said keep away, but who knew he would turn out to be a wife-obsessed maniac after marriage? This was Piri and the Grand Duke's contract marriage. Although they had a contract marriage, they announced to others that they fell in love at first sight, that they were destined lovers, although no one would believe it. In the coming year, Piri's personal safety would be guaranteed, and Tur would investigate Piri's body that was immune to the curse, just as Piri had said at the beginning. Tur's marriage to her should be able to temporarily deal with his marriage arrangement with the royal family, but this was after all just an expedient measure. What to do later would depend on the situation. And now most importantly, their grand wedding was over. Walking out of the wedding hall, Piri's eyes were full of tears. The wedding was finally over. She was almost exhausted now. Before making Sif lose everything, she had nearly been worn out. How urgent must Tur have been? He actually said they would marry in 3 days. And their wedding was extremely luxurious, which added quite a burden to both of them. Extravagant ceremonial dress could finally be taken off now. Actually, Piri understood the suspicious looks from the guests, because they thought the Grand Duke married her to escape the arranged marriage with the princess, and they believed there must be some improper interests between the two. Piri secretly rejoiced. Thankfully this was just a fake marriage, otherwise she would surely become depressed. Just as Piri was lost in thought, Tur slowly said to her, "Would you like to extend the contract marriage?" Piri responded with a bright smile, "I'll think about it," but her inner thought was, "I don't want to at all." Although Piri now knew the whole story about the family curse, living with this guy for more than a year would surely kill her. Moreover, she had a question to ask her now. On the day Piri died, she heard Sif mention a curse, and she died because of that curse. When she was affected by the Lapalayan family's curse, she felt the same pain. Could these two curses be the same? After organizing her thoughts, Pirai asked, "Does your family sell blood as poison? I died once before, right? That feeling was the same as being affected by your family's curse." After saying this, Pirai felt it was nonsensical. She thought better of it and walked away alone. How could such a large family do something like that? Tur caught up to her in a few quick steps. Just as they were leaving, they actually saw the princess. The fourth princess of the empire stood before them with angry eyes. Even though he was as noble as he was, her fiancé had been stolen by another woman. She was Princess Leah, the fourth princess. This tragic princess was born sickly and had been bedridden for years, with only death awaiting her. Although Pirai didn't know what changes had occurred in the past, it seemed now that, as everyone said, she had recovered from her illness and regained her health. But why did she just call the Grand Duke Duke? Although the Lapalayan family's elevation from Duke to Grand Duke happened less than a few decades ago, he was a Grand Duke now. Tur stepped forward and bowed. "Princess, why have you come here?" Leah gripped her umbrella tightly. "Duke, are you really going to abandon me and marry another woman? Do you think anyone could love you more than I do?" Pirai was stunned. At first, she thought it was just an arranged marriage by the king's whim, but she never expected this was the princess's own wish. "But Tur, you should control your cold expression a bit." At this moment, Leah was almost hysterical. "I can't live without you, you are my man." Pirai covered her mouth in disbelief. Did the princess love her this much? Leah now noticed Pirai and asked through gritted teeth, "Why are you here? You shouldn't be here." Looking at Leah approaching step by step, Pirai was already panicked. Just then a voice came. "My goodness, what's going on here?" She bowed to the princess and continued, "By the way, more and more people are gathering to watch, Princess. Don't you mind people seeing you in this state?" The situation was becoming more and more awkward, with more onlookers gathering. Faced with this sharp-tongued woman, Leah was speechless, and Tur also spoke up to break the awkwardness, saying he and Pirai would take their leave. Watching Tur's retreating figure, Leah spoke ominously, "Remember this. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't want to live. And you'll know in the future that I'm the one you need, because if we two aren't together, neither of us will be happy." Pirai turned back to look at Leah. She really didn't know the princess loved her this much. Although she didn't know what had happened between them. "Princess, you just need to wait one more year." This woman had bright red hair, and her sharp gaze gave off an incredibly arrogant aura. Pirai was terrified, but she still politely opened her mouth to thank her for her help. Tur slowly said at this time, "This is my sister." The woman also spoke up, "Hello, I'm Xia. I heard our family's curse doesn't work on you, so why did you marry Tur?" Tur coldly said, "Didn't I say we fell in love at first sight?" Xia's gaze also turned cold. "Do you think I would believe that? If you're going to lie to me, at least make the lie sound more convincing. Everyone in the empire knows you're getting married because you want to escape the king's forced marriage. Did you have to make it so obvious? I see you're afraid the social circle doesn't know your true purpose. Isn't this just telling the king I just married randomly because you kept pushing me? Are you satisfied now? You're only making our family become a laughingstock." The carriage was now completely silent. Pirai just hoped Tur would say something. He was now like a fish caught in a fire at the city gate. In this oppressive atmosphere, Pirai noticed that people in their family all dressed very heavily. They must be very hot. These clothes look too stuffy. Pirai decided to open the window for some air. However, the carriage jolted, and she accidentally bumped into Tur's handsome face. Seeing Tur's embarrassed look, Xia burst out laughing. Now she suddenly found that Tur's current wife was quite interesting. Although it cost Tur's face, the atmosphere had eased. But surely not everyone in the Lapalayan family would be this frightening? With an anxious heart, she arrived at the Lapalayan family's territory. Just then the coachman told them they had reached the mansion, but there was a commotion up ahead, so they couldn't go in yet. Tur slowly said at this time, "So Urs has returned." Pirai knew this person. He was the heir of the Lapalayan family. But when she looked more carefully, Pirai's brows furrowed. How could this person be here? This woman had just finished her wedding. On her way home, she was intercepted by her former lover. Sif was shouting loudly, "Pirai, I know you're in there, just meet me once." Urs was very angry. "I've told you, this is not a place for ordinary knights like you." But how could Sif give up? He kept shouting to himself, thinking Pirai would come out. Urs frowned, then angrily drew the sword from the guard beside him. "An ordinary knight like you has no right to come to this place. Since you want to die, I'll grant your wish. You have insulted the Lapalayan family. This is the punishment you deserve." Just as the sword was about to fall, Urs's hand was caught. Tur had arrived, and Sif was now overjoyed because he saw Pirai. Pirai slowly said, "I've already told you I don't love you." Seeing that soft methods weren't working, Sif tried force. He actually shouted at Pirai, "Why have you suddenly become like this?" The current Pirai was no longer the weak Pirai of before. She had Tur behind her now. Sif looked at the fierce-looking Tur, and his heart was already starting to panic. He could only say submissively, "Before the ceremony begins, begins, the ordinary Knights Corps will hold a parade. Please come watch. Piri was speechless. What was he talking about? Ter's face darkened. I can't even listen to this anymore. Do you not want your ordinary knight title either? Then he ordered people to drag him away. Sif hurriedly shouted, I'll wait for you under the tree where we used to meet every day. You must come that day. After Sif was dragged away, Ter asked, Is he the one you said wanted to kill you? I'll remember him. In the dining room, Piri was already starving. Ter and had things to discuss, so they disappeared after leaving Piri with the servants. Piri never thought Sif would follow her to the mansion. How could such a thing happen today? How would she face the family members after this? And because of the commotion earlier, the servants' expressions weren't very good either. And she had previously heard that the family heir had been recuperating in a remote mountain village. Had he returned now? Their family had too many secrets, and Piri couldn't tell which were true and which were false. Just then, Ter came to Piri's side. Piri asked him how old was and whose child he was. Ter slowly said, He's my brother's son. My brother passed away and my sister-in-law abandoned and left alone. I adopted him back. Don't worry, I'll send him back to the countryside. At this moment, Piri was already panicked. She knew so many secrets. Would she die? She anxiously left her seat, then walked towards the bedroom. However, on the way she saw a strange maid. Piri slowly spoke. What are you doing there? The maid saw Piri and curtsied, saying she was bringing dinner to young Master but he hadn't opened the door. Piri suddenly thought of today's events. He probably got scolded by Ter. He must be heartbroken. If it weren't for Sif, he wouldn't have been scolded. Piri decided to take on this task. She indicated that she would handle this. Piri pushed the food cart and opened the room door. Urz's angry roar burst out. Who dares to open my room door without my permission? Seeing that it was Piri who came, Urz was stunned. Piri sat by the bed and introduced herself. I'm Piri. Urz's face darkened. You're doing this to please the Grand Duke, right? It seems today's incident made you feel very guilty. If it were me, I would have died of shame and wouldn't come in at all. Don't bother me anymore, please leave. Just then Piri put her hand on Urz's face. Have you been crying? Urz, whose secret had been exposed, immediately blushed. He pulled Piri and pushed her out. Please stop caring about me. With that, he closed the door. Just then the maid came forward and said, Grand Duke's wife, tonight you and the Grand Duke will consummate your marriage. We have prepared the bath water. Please bathe and change. Piri was stunned. She had actually forgotten about this. But she had a contract marriage with Ter, and Ter wasn't interested in women, so it should be fine, right? Just as Piri was lost in thought, Ter opened the door. Piri hurriedly said she would sleep somewhere else. After saying this, she rushed to leave. However, she hadn't taken a few steps when she was called back. Where are you going? If you sleep in the guest room, what's the point of our marriage? If rumors spread that we've consummated our marriage, it will dispel outside doubts. After our contract ends, I just need to act like I miss you, then the king won't force me to marry. So during our marriage period, we must sleep in the same room. Don't worry, I won't touch you. And so, Pearl lay down on the bed. Although her body was tired, she just couldn't fall asleep. Just then, Tel slowly said, Are you asleep? My sister seems quite pleased with you. Originally, the title of Grand Duke belonged to her, but due to a curse, she lost all her family members and fell into madness. At that time, she was unable to work normally. Fortunately, she has now emerged from the darkness. The reason she criticizes me is because she's concerned about our family. After hearing these words, Pearl fell into deep thought. The Grand Duke opening up to her made her feel somewhat uncomfortable. Although she did this for revenge, perhaps she was being too hasty. Pearl's heart began to waver. What if her choice was wrong? What should she do then? This female protagonist's fate was too tragic. Not only was she killed by her stepmother, but she was also betrayed by her lover. What did she do wrong to deserve such an end? After a nightmare, Pearl sat up abruptly, her eyes filled with terror. Her body was trembling uncontrollably, while Tel kept asking about her condition. However, her mind was completely blank. Just then, a woman burst in. But the scene before her made her freeze. Pearl was currently nestled in Tel's arms, looking to anyone like a sweet newlywed couple. Pearl was dumbfounded. What was this situation? How did she end up in Tel's arms, and why were they being watched? Even when sitting on the chair, Pearl hadn't recovered. It seemed all she could do was cause trouble. And this lady beside her, why did she keep shouting at the Grand Duke, going on about how he got married without permission? Tel impatiently commanded, Martin, go prepare a carriage. Urz will return to the villa today. Urz panicked. She didn't want to go back, so she pleaded, Can I stay here? I promise I'll behave. I didn't mean to take down that night yesterday, I was just too angry. Tel slammed the table as he stood up. I've already told you that if you get hurt, our family's secret will be discovered. If you truly regret it, then go back. Asked, if you're going to send me away to the villa, why did you adopt me in the first place? I don't want to stay there alone. Pearl couldn't bear to watch anymore. She muttered softly, this child hasn't eaten properly today, can't we discuss this after dinner? Tell looked stern, it's better for her to return quickly, besides, this isn't something you need to worry about. After he left, the woman who had burst into the room earlier introduced herself. I apologize, Lady Grand Duchess, for not introducing myself earlier. I am the steward, Biha. She said this with a kindly smile. Pearl blushed and somehow felt increasingly at ease. Then she walked through the mansion with Biha. Listening to her introduction, Pearl asked inappropriately, does the Grand Duke dislike Biha spoke slowly, the Grand Duke is just worried about the young master. The toxins in Urz's blood are more potent. He's still young and the toxins cause great suffering depending on his physical condition. When the young master isn't feeling well, the toxins in his body cause him great pain. So to let him rest peacefully, His Grace sent him to the villa. You needn't worry too much, His Grace is actually caring for the young master in his own way. But Pearl still found it strange. If the Grand Duke likes why does he act like he dislikes him? Is under such great pressure because of this, why doesn't the Grand Duke explain clearly? While Pearl was lost in thought, a sudden noise came from nearby. As soon as she entered the door, her head was struck. Just moments ago, Pearl had heard a loud crash. The maid said the young master was having a tantrum. Despite their warnings, Pearl went to Urz's room, which led to her being struck just now. Panicked, why are you here? Do you look down on me too? After saying this, he crawled under the covers in distress, refusing to meet Pearl's eyes. Pearl remained silent, carefully observing the messy room. Pearl sat beside gently stroking his head. I don't look down on you. Let me bandage your wounds and then I'll leave, alright? However, pushed Pearl away, shouting that he didn't need help. But when he emerged from under the covers, he saw the wound on Pearl's forehead that he had just caused. Became anxious, quickly apologizing and begging Pearl not to tell Tell, saying he would surely be thrown out if Tell knew. But how could Pearl blame him? She repeatedly assured him that she wouldn't tell anyone. Then she gently bandaged Urz's wounds. Although wounds would eventually heal, Urz's condition was very abnormal, his reaction earlier was strange. It was as if the world would end if Tell found out about this, the two of them really needed to have a good talk. Pearl felt she should help mediate between them. Pearl told that if he didn't want to return to the villa, he should try to convince Tell and she would help him. Asked, why do you want to help me? Is it because you see that I can't do anything and feel sorry for me? If you're doing this just to please the Grand Duke, I advise you to stop. Because in his eyes I'm worthless, you'd just be wasting your effort. Pearl asked in return, did the Grand Duke say that? Deflated, does that even need to be said? Everyone in the household knows, how could I not know? However, Pearl reached out and pinched Urz's cute cheeks. Thanks to you, that annoying knight disappeared from my sight yesterday, isn't that your achievement? Even if others deny you, don't always deny yourself. Actually, until yesterday I was like you, constantly doubting myself. But seeing you now has suddenly made me realize I think I should change this way of thinking. If you're hurting yourself because of this, then you're not allowed to do such foolish things anymore. Because self-harm doesn't do any good. As for the villa matter, talk to the Grand Duke properly when he returns. Saw the wound on Pearl's head. He carefully touched it, she's bleeding. Pearl only then realized why it had hurt so much earlier, but said it wasn't serious. Disagreed, how could such a serious injury be nothing? Anxiously, he quickly wiped away the blood from Pearl's forehead, as if this would help her heal faster. Feeling Urz's concern, Pearl smiled with understanding. This made feel even more guilty. He said carefully, don't you know how terrifying my blood is? However, Pearl had already tried Tell's blood, and said she would be fine even if she drank Urz's blood. Suddenly Pearl noticed that Urz's wounds hadn't been bandaged. Just as was about to ask Pearl what she meant, blood began flowing from Pearl's nose uncontrollably. Intense pain caused Pearl to collapse to the ground. Why was this happening? She hadn't drunk Urz's blood. Could the blood have entered her body through the wound? But even when she drank Tell's blood, she had never felt this much pain. Why was she feeling so terrible now? Pearl told herself not to faint or it would frighten However, when the intense pain struck, she could no longer hold on and lost consciousness. When she woke up again, she was lying in bed. Tell saw she was awake and quickly asked about her condition. Pearl said she was fine now. She recalled the scene before she fainted. Surely it was the toxins in Urza's blood at work. His blood carried stronger toxins. But fortunately, she had revived again. But Urz couldn't believe it. Everyone who came into contact with their family's inherited blood would die. Tell spoke calmly at this point. Didn't I tell you she wouldn't die? Although I don't know why, our family's blood really doesn't affect her. Pearl was worried about Urz, who must be feeling terrible after being so frightened and then scolded. However, Tell wasn't done scolding just Urz. Even if the blood doesn't affect you, you shouldn't be so careless. Pearl could only bow her head and apologize, admitting she had indeed been too careless. Then Tell coldly looked at Urz again. Now do you understand? Your actions could kill someone. A woman had experienced death 3 times but miraculously came back to life each time. Pearl was confused. Was she immortal now? Facing Tell's lecture, Pearl lowered her head and apologized, saying she would be more careful in the future. And Urz, still being a child after all, was already in tears. Tell turned around wanting to say something, but was struck silent seeing Urz in this state. Urz said between sobs, I'll go back. Your Grace is right, I was really thoughtless. Lady Grand Duchess, I'm sorry. After saying this, he pitifully wiped his tears. He turned, preparing to leave. Pearl watched Urza's retreating figure, engaged in an intense internal struggle. Originally as an outsider, she shouldn't interfere in this family's private matters. But why did she instinctively reach out and stop Urz? Urz turned back in surprise. What are you doing? Pearl firmly told him to say what he wanted to say. Then she said to Tell, isn't it because there's no one to guide him that children get into trouble? Urz is still young. If he makes mistakes by accident, you can't blame him. If you want to blame someone, blame the Grand Duke who hasn't properly guided him. After saying this, Pearl wondered if she had gone mad. How dare she speak to Tell like this? Was she tired of living? Besides, she could leave in a year anyway. Was there any need to get involved in their family affairs? But she had heard that child say he didn't want to stay there alone. How could she just ignore it? Pearl gathered her courage and said a few final words. Do you plan to keep Urz locked away forever, isolated from the world? Tell coldly responded, what are you saying? What do you mean by locked away forever? Pearl held tightly to Urz's clothes. If you truly want what's best for him, then please listen to what he really thinks. Tell moved close to Pearl's ear and said seriously, no one can guarantee today's incident won't happen again, and next time you might not be able to escape death like today. However, at this moment, Urz stepped in front of Pearl. Your Grace, I want to stay here. I promise there won't be a second time like today. If you let me stay, I'll stay quiet and not draw anyone's attention. Tell found these two people quite troublesome, but finally relented. Urz, do you have anything else to get from the villa? Urz looked at Tell in disbelief, overjoyed. And so Urz stayed here. And Pearl, who had recovered, was about to receive unexpected visitors. Since the incident with Urz, Pearl had made many efforts to better adapt to the Grand Duke's household. She needed to familiarize herself with the Grand Duke's affairs during the contract period, and building connections was also important. Although these were all part of Pearl's duties, the household staff didn't see it that way. Especially when dealing with external matters, they would always show their displeasure to Pearl. After all, it hadn't been long, and the Grand Duchess was already trying to interfere in family affairs. But fortunately, since the Urz incident, the gentle-natured Martin had grown closer to Pearl and helped her quite a bit. Pearl knew he did this because he felt sorry about the Urz incident. If she could become closer to him, she might be able to learn more about the Zahard Earl's family. Now Pearl had learned several things. First, besides their current mansion, they had other residences, and Tell mainly operated in the Grand Duke's territory. The mansion in the capital was managed by Martin's eldest son, who handled affairs with Tell mainly through correspondence. Tell was now staying in the capital because of the king's summons, and Pearl worried he might be reprimanded by the king because of their marriage. Second, the common folk in the family didn't know the secret of the curse. Only Martin and a few direct relatives knew about this. Recently, Pearl heard that Martin's youngest daughter would join Tell's Night Order. Third, Tell was really investigating Pearl's body, regularly sending doctors to draw her blood. Pearl didn't know if he could find answers from her blood, answers that even Pearl herself didn't know. Although Pearl wanted to talk with Tell, he came back very late every day, so she never had the chance. Moreover, Pearl discovered an amazing fact. The sofa in the Grand Duke's house was more comfortable than the bed in the Earl's house. She had no problem sleeping on the sofa. And during her time living here, she must learn more things. Even the nightmares in her mind gradually became blurred, and she had no problem not seeing her family. After learning from here, she would surely be able to manage the Earl's household properly. Just then, Martin came to seek an audience, saying there were visitors. Can you believe it? These two gentle-looking mother and daughter before her were the ones who killed their stepdaughter in her previous life. Pearl worried that turning them away would cause gossip, so she let them in. The reason they came to find Pearl must be because she had handed over the management of the Earl's house to her uncle. Because after that, the mother and daughter could neither live in the main room nor spend money freely. And after Sif was driven away that day, they must have been even more heartbroken, because Sif lost his qualification to join the Knight Order and couldn't receive any inheritance. Pearl was constantly on guard. Although this was the Grand Duke's mansion, they had once plotted against her, and no one knew what they might do. Just then, her stepmother suddenly burst into tears. Pearl, it's all my fault. After you left, I deeply reflected on my actions. I admit I didn't care enough about you before. Otherwise, how could I have missed that besides your father's matter, there were other things making you sad? Although this marriage was your own decision as your mother, I should formally congratulate you. I'm sorry. Pearl was stunned. Was this just another act? Her heart trembled violently. They must be trying to make her lower her guard. She should stay away from them. However, just as Pearl stood up to leave, her stepmother accidentally knocked over the teacup due to her rheumatism, and burned herself quite badly. However, she didn't blame Pearl, but instead showed false concern for her. In that instant, Pearl recalled her childhood, when her stepmother had protected her in the same way. This made Pearl increasingly doubt herself. Only she knew about her death and resurrection. And after waking up, the story followed exactly the same pattern as before, which was why Pearl concluded they had killed her. But what if it was just a coincidence? What if nothing had changed and this was all just her imagination? Pearl suspected she might be going mad. Perhaps it was just a nightmare she had every day. The idea of dying and coming back to life was too absurd. Meanwhile, the servants were discussing the mother and daughter. Despite their elegant manner, they look like they want to kill someone. Is this how all nobles are? And I heard Pearl drove them out of the Earl's mansion and wanted to keep the property for herself? Some say she seduced the Grand Duke with her beauty. The two chatted enthusiastically, completely unaware of Urs appearing behind them. Urs coldly looked at the two. What were you just saying? The mother and daughter pair had mastered the art of pretense perfectly, having guilty consciences yet still putting on a good person act. Because the mother and daughter's acting was so good, Pearl even began to doubt herself. The younger sister loudly questioned, Sister, when did you start seeing the Grand Duke? The stepmother quickly stopped her, indicating this wasn't important. Then she pretended to be well-intentioned, but now some strange rumors are circulating outside. Although these rumors are groundless, they're saying you drove us out and kept the property for yourself. We of course know these words are nonsense, but I feel you didn't follow the normal procedures for your wedding. Don't you think the Grand Duke was being too arbitrary? And now even we can barely see you. Although His Grace has a noble status, his actions clearly show disregard for you. Your wedding is already over, I shouldn't say much more, but we should at least give gifts, right? This way we can hand you over to your in-laws with peace of mind. The younger sister chimed in at this point. The side rooms are too small to live in, let us go back. We won't interfere with Uncle. Pearl knew they wanted money, but suddenly she found it hard to breathe. What should she do? Perhaps she should give them money and let them leave, then figure something out later. The younger sister noticed Pearl's unusual expression and continued to add fuel to the fire. It seems Sif still hasn't forgotten about Sister. Just then Urs arrived in time. Who did you say hasn't forgotten who? This startled the mother and daughter pair. Pearl looked toward the sound as Urs walked in with determined steps. You're here to ask Lady Grand Duchess for money, aren't you? But those words you just said, are you challenging the Grand Duke's authority? The mother and daughter were intimidated, not daring to say a word. Urs quickly ran to Pearl's side. At this moment, Pearl looked extremely unwell and was breaking out in cold sweat. Urs asked concernedly, what did they do to you? The younger sister panicked, quickly claiming she hadn't done anything. The stepmother maintained a gentle demeanor, stating she was just here to see her daughter. Urs gritted his teeth, asking Pearl if they should send them away today. Pearl quickly nodded. After they left, Pearl finally breathed a sigh of relief, able to breathe normally again. Sif had come that day and Urs helped, and today Urs helped again. Pearl was very grateful for this. Said if possible he would like to escort Pearl back to her room. Just now, Pearl had sent away the enemies who had killed her. Accompanied her back to her room. On the way, Pearl was lost in thought. Whenever she was in the same room as the mother and daughter, she would have trouble breathing. But no matter how she thought about it, it couldn't have been just a dream. She had an instinctive rejection of them. This couldn't be simple. Just then asked, "Do you know the festival is opening soon? Thanks to the Grand Duke arriving in time during the last war, we achieved victory. I heard this festival is to celebrate the Grand Duke and the King's achievements." Pearl carefully recalled that the Empire held a festival every spring. This festival was to celebrate the Empire's prosperity and victory in war. This grand festival would last for a week. Pearl remembered that in her previous life, she had enjoyed the festival happily with Sif. Unlike Pearl, who had the perspective of hindsight, didn't understand why they were holding a festival now when the war had long ended. While holding festivals was good, why did they have to say it was to commemorate the war victory? Why would the king do this? He had heard that many children lost their parents in the war. Pearl interrupted Urza's words, saying she understood what he meant. But even in the Grand Duke's house, one shouldn't show dissatisfaction with the emperor. Pearl pondered that there must be more to this festival than meets the eye. The emperor surely had other intentions. This year's festival was equally significant for Pearl, because in her previous life, she died on the last day of the festival. Meanwhile, Tell looked at the letters before him with a headache. They were all from that clingy princess, and the date to return to the Grand Duke's territory had to be pushed back. They would have to wait until after the festival to return, because the king wanted to root out all problems. Just then Tell asked, "How is Pearl doing lately?" Martin was very surprised after hearing this. It was unexpected that the Grand Duke would care about someone. Then he seriously told Tell everything Pearl had been doing recently, adding that he hadn't expected Pearl to be such a quick learner, and mentioned that her stepmother had visited today. Tell's face darkened as he said, "From now on, don't let them in even if they're family." They were supposed to be contract spouses, yet they kept thinking about and caring for each other. Tell didn't know why his mind was full of thoughts of Pearl. Just then Martin asked, "Will you divorce this time? I can probably guess why you two got married. If you want others to think you're real spouses, start by changing how you address each other. And don't always stay in your office. You haven't been spending time with the Grand Duchess lately, and you two rarely appear in social circles. You need to be careful of rumors. Are you still having trouble sleeping? I'll bring you different tea tomorrow." Tell stood up, saying he understood. Then he left the office. He walked alone in the dark corridor. Outside, thunder roared and rain poured down. He slowly looked out the window. His eyes filled with sorrow and coldness. The rain outside gradually turned crimson, reflecting blood red in Tell's eyes. The fine raindrops turned into swords, falling like rain, each blade precisely piercing innocent warriors. Tell didn't linger, but walked forward without looking back. He rubbed his eyes as he entered the room, only to find Pearl asleep on the sofa. After staring for a long while, Tell carried Pearl to the bed. He was about to cover her with a blanket when Pearl flinched. Then she reached out toward Tell. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she begged for someone to help her. After hesitating for a moment, Tell sat down and gently placed his hand on Pearl's stomach, saying, "Here, no one can hurt you, so sleep peacefully." After hearing this, Pearl's nightmare was miraculously dispelled, and she fell into peaceful sleep. The next morning, Pearl was startled awake. She had clearly fallen asleep on the sofa. Had she driven Tell out of his bed? Speak of the devil, Pearl turned her head and saw Tell. After letting out a scream, Pearl quickly apologized. Tell said nothing, just silently went with Pearl to the dining room. Pearl couldn't eat at all. Her mind was full of thoughts of Tell. Thankfully, she hadn't forced him onto the sofa. But what was wrong with her, not only letting her sleep on the bed, but also saying they should change how they address each other? Pearl found it all embarrassing. Just then, the silent Tell spoke up, "Since you're staying in the capital, why not enroll in the academy? What do you think?" Hearing this, was stunned, then asked in disbelief, "The academy? Can I really go?" Tell replied flatly, "If you don't want to go, then forget it." Pearl hadn't expected Tell to let go to the academy. This wasn't like something Tell would do. Had Martin perhaps persuaded him? Voiced his confusion. "Why did you suddenly agree? Didn't you say before that you would absolutely never let me go to the academy?" Tell's face remained expressionless. That's still how I feel, but considering you must adapt to social life in the future, that's why I agreed to let you go to the academy. Urs lowered his head, conflicted, worried he might accidentally hurt others. Upon learning what was worrying Urs, both Pearl and Martin, who supported him, spoke up, excitedly telling Urs not to worry. Pearl cautioned, but when you're angry, don't throw things or draw your sword anymore. Urs nodded solemnly. I'll definitely be careful and behave well, and won't let others notice me. Pearl hadn't seen Urs this happy in a long time. He clearly really wanted to go to the academy. Tell probably wanted to use this as a way to apologize. It was quite unexpected. After the meal, Pearl met the new maid Rebecca, who was Baron Nitz's daughter. Pearl had heard about the maid selection long ago, but she hadn't expected anyone to apply. They wouldn't want to work under Pearl, because she might divorce Tell any day, but it was no wonder Rebecca applied, as her family was reportedly in poor condition. Rebecca herself hadn't expected to become Pearl's maid, and she was now very happy and excited. Pearl looked at her enthusiastic manner and thought this child was quite lively. Next, Pearl needed to handle external affairs, and since Rebecca was now her personal maid, she had to go along. After changing clothes, Pearl felt somewhat tired, wondering when she would encounter her stepmother and sister again. She couldn't be as helpless as yesterday. Suddenly she remembered the words she heard before dying. Is it because the curse took effect? Although expensive, this is the best way to get rid of someone without leaving traces. Pearl still hadn't figured out how she died. She felt she needed to properly investigate the curse Sif mentioned. Pearl had no clues about this matter and could only tell herself to investigate calmly later. When Pearl came back to her senses, she was already standing behind Martin, learning how to handle affairs. Just then, a subordinate came running urgently and whispered something in Martin's ear. Martin immediately said he had something to handle and hoped Pearl could deal with the remaining matters alone. In the carriage, Rebecca expressed her curiosity. I've been wondering since earlier. What is this box for? Pearl explained it was a donation for the temple. This was the task Martin had given her, and she also needed to consult about some matters at the temple. Actually, the Repilian family had always been making donations to the temple, and the amounts were substantial. However, this hadn't been made public, and Pearl didn't understand why, since making it public would be good for the family's image. Rebecca understood, and looking out the window, she sighed. The festival hasn't even started, but the streets are already so lively. Pearl nodded. Then the carriage arrived at the temple. Actually, Pearl wanted to ask the priest if the curse Sif mentioned was some kind of sorcery, but if the priest thought she was interested in black magic, that would be terrible. In others' eyes, she was the controversial Grand Duchess who had seduced Tell and even driven away her family members who came to visit. Whatever Pearl did was suspicious, and with the priests trusting Tell so much, showing any suspicious behavior would do her no good. Pearl had hoped to find something useful in the library, but this was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Suddenly Pearl picked up a book titled Can I Curse You? She asked the priest, is this book about heretical black magic? How could there be such books in the temple library? What if people read it and want to harm others? The priest quickly explained, sorcery only exists in book records, and it was sealed away centuries ago. You can't simply equate it with black magic. The temple has such books because we need to know everything to be prepared. Just like the divine punishment back then was a curse from the gods. A companion quickly interrupted this excited priest. Stop saying useless things. Pearl smiled and left after hearing this. After all that trouble, she still found no clues. She would have to take it slowly. The guard nearby looked at Pearl. He was sent by Tell to watch over and protect her. But this woman was going to too many places. What was this place selling grilled fish cakes? However, in the next moment, Pearl seemed to see something. She suddenly turned and ran away excitedly. The red-headed woman had gone mad, recklessly rushing toward a man without regard for her safety. An oncoming carriage was racing towards her and death seemed imminent. Fortunately, Pearl was quick enough to pull her back and they both fell to the ground. Pearl was scared out of her wits. What was even more shocking was that this crazy woman was Celsia. Celsia stared blankly in the direction where the man had been. The child's hair beside her changed from red to brown. She must be having hallucinations again. People around them whispered and gossiped, wondering what was wrong with this noblewoman to act so improperly. While Celsia's mind was in chaos, Pearl placed her own hat on Celsia's head to shield her face from onlookers. Celsia slowly stood up, resuming her usual cold demeanor, and said not to tell anyone about today's incident. Then she left without another word. Back at the mansion, Pearl recalled the scene, noting how disturbed Celsia had seemed, though she didn't know why. The head maid then noticed Pearl's hat was missing. Pearl claimed it had been blown away by the wind, keeping today's events to herself. Just then, Urs came running over and Pearl quickly hid her injured hand. She asked Urs if he had prepared everything for the academy. Urs hesitated before answering, "I'm just going for registration, and there are still a few days until then. I don't have much to prepare. I wanted to ask if you could accompany me when the time comes? Though you don't have to if you're busy." Pearl's heart ached with sympathy. She placed her hand on Urs's head, gently stroking it. "I'm sorry, I should have been the one to ask you that. Of course I'll go with you." These words made Urs's face turn bright red. The Duchess was being far too kind to him. When Tell returned that night, Pearl couldn't understand why he had been coming home so early lately. Tell spoke slowly. "I heard you met my sister today." Pearl's heart jumped, and she quickly explained that it was just a chance encounter. She immediately changed the subject. "Will you go to the academy registration with Urs? I know you're busy, but I think it would be better to go with someone who knows the academy's layout. You've been there before, haven't you, my lord?" Tell responded flatly, "I've never been to the academy." Pearl was shocked. Had he also been taught by private tutors because of the curse? At this moment, Tell brought up another important matter. "You wanted to hire a lawyer, right? Let me handle that." Pearl was thoroughly confused now. Why was Tell suddenly being so kind to her? Watching Tell's retreating figure, Pearl called out impulsively, "You can sleep in the bed tonight." After bidding farewell to Urs, Pearl went to seek out a lawyer. She had originally planned to accompany Urs to the academy today, but since Tell had arranged the meeting with the lawyer, those plans fell through, making her feel guilty towards Urs. Leaving the lawyer's office, Pearl felt she hadn't understood anything. Without inheritance rights, there were 3 conditions under which one could file a lawsuit. First, if the will was forged. Second, if the will was made under secret coercion. Third, if the count was killed by Pearl. Although none of these conditions applied, negative news about Pearl was currently spreading everywhere, so they needed to be prepared for anything. Since marrying into the Grand Duke's family, Pearl had never directly addressed these rumors, but she felt responsible for clearing them up. For now, she would head to the academy. After waiting for quite a while, Pearl noticed the carriage still hadn't arrived. The attendant explained that because they were installing statues of the king and Grand Duke nearby, there were many onlookers and the carriage was stuck. Pearl suddenly felt that it sounded familiar. Just then, a tremendous crash rang out. Everyone turned around in panic. Pearl remembered, in her previous life, Sif had held her hand and brought her to this very spot. And before her lay a pile of rubble. Coming back to her senses, Pearl looked at the stones before her. It was exactly the same as in her previous life, except this time Sif wasn't by her side. After the statue shattered, newspapers floated down from the sky. What had just happened matched her memory perfectly. Returning to the past wasn't an illusion, and her death wasn't just a dream. Pearl awakened as if from a trance, more certain than ever in her conviction, she wasn't crazy. Looking at the newspaper in her hand, Duchess abandons common knight boyfriend, marries Grand Duke for power. In her previous life, the newspapers had also published articles attacking the Rapillion family, but now that Pearl had become the Duchess, the content had changed accordingly. The people behind these publications must be those 3. After arriving at the academy, Pearl encountered an unexpected visitor as soon as she stepped out of the carriage. It was the 4th Princess Leah. When Pearl came to her senses, she was already seated beside Leah. Looking at the contemptuous gaze of the person next to her, Pearl felt a chill run down her spine. She heard that Leah had come to pick up the 7th princess who was studying at the academy, and wondered if she was still angry. At this moment, a noblewoman nearby remarked teasingly, "I didn't expect to meet the Duchess here. I heard rumors that the young master had returned to the city." Another lady chimed in, "On my way here I saw many scattered papers with news about the Duchess. The writing was rather crude. Have you seen them, Duchess?" Pearl's expression darkened. If these papers had appeared here, they must have spread throughout the city's streets and alleys. Then Leah spoke slowly, "While I find this regrettable, it works in my favor. I'd like to invite the Duchess to visit the palace. If you accept the royal family's invitation as thanks, I'll have everyone who spread these gossip bulletins arrested." The bulletins had already spread throughout the capital, which meant almost everyone would need to be punished. Pearl politely declined the request and stood up to take her leave. Watching Pearl's retreating figure, Leah seemed to speak with hidden meaning. What a pity, I had so much more to discuss with you. Until we meet again. The provocation in her tone was clear, and Pearl clenched her fists. Leah's attitude was so different from at the wedding. What was going on? Leaving the waiting room, Pearl saw Urs. Though Urs was clearly happy, he maintained a haughty expression while declaring that the academy wasn't anything special. As they walked out of the academy together, they unexpectedly saw Tell outside. Apparently he had come to pick up Urs. Though he claimed not to care, it seemed he actually cared very much in his heart. The foolish Urs still didn't understand why Tell had come. At Pearl's prompting, Urs's face gradually turned red. Tell thought he had a fever. To avoid being lectured, Urs quickly claimed he just had a cold. Then he practically ran away, leaving Pearl awkwardly standing there alone. Even after sitting in the carriage, neither of them said a word. Finally, Tell broke the silence. I heard you saw the bulletins. The article that was originally going to be published was about divorce. I had people remove it. I didn't expect it would cause these problems instead. I failed you. And about the broken statue, both incidents were likely done by the same person. For now, you should stay in the mansion. Pearl was stunned. Tell was actually apologizing to her about this. Yet he never apologized for poisoning her. Pearl trembled with anger, wondering what kind of game he was playing. Early the next morning, Celsia arrived and immediately embraced Urs. Turning her head, Celsia noticed Pearl. Unlike her previous distant attitude since the carriage incident, she had changed her opinion of Pearl considerably. Urs was even more enthusiastic about Pearl, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. His face broke into a bright smile. Since returning from the academy registration, Urs had been isolated from the outside world. Although classes had started at the academy, Urs couldn't attend until he fully recovered. To stay by Urs's side, the Grand Duke had even brought his work home. The doctor said Urs only had a cold and the symptoms weren't severe, but they claimed they needed to prevent infection and wouldn't let Pearl enter the room. Not even a maid could be seen attending to him. Pearl didn't understand why they needed to be so careful, and wondered if Urs was getting the food he wanted. When no one was looking, Pearl quietly asked Urs if there was anything he wanted to eat. Urs softly replied that he wanted strawberry cake. However, the sharp-eyed Tell discovered this and coldly said, "You're still sick." Pearl quickly proposed her idea, "Let's take turns looking after Urs. I miss him too." Tell firmly rejected Pearl, "We still don't know the cause of his illness, so you can't look after him." Pearl was confused. If it was contagious, wouldn't it just be an infectious disease? Why didn't they know the cause? Tell added, "Uncle is coming. He's our family's primary physician. He's coming to see you and will check on Urs's condition while he's here." Pearl suddenly understood, so all the blood samples taken from her had been sent to Uncle. At this point, Celsia offered to look after Urs, saying Pearl and Tell could go meet Uncle since she wouldn't leave until tomorrow anyway. The two then left the room. Pearl asked, "The princess has been writing you many letters lately. Shouldn't you reply?" Tell shook his head, indicating it wasn't necessary. However, Pearl was worried, "But those are letters from the royal family. Is it really all right to ignore them?" Still, she decided to follow Tell's lead, as she didn't want to meet with the princess either. That night, Tell hadn't returned from picking someone up. Worried that Urs wouldn't get the food he wanted, Pearl brought food to his room. However, the next moment after opening the door, she witnessed a shocking scene. She saw Urs covered in blood, lying weakly in Celsia's arms. Pearl let out a cry and ran to get water. She anxiously asked, "How did Urs become like this?" and reached out to help. But Celsia stopped her, "Don't come closer. Have you forgotten our family's blood is poisonous? He goes through this pain periodically. He just needs to endure it. Don't worry, you should leave." Pearl trembled with emotion. "How can I not worry? The child is in so much pain now, I can't just stand by." She ran out again, bringing in basin after basin of water to wipe Urs clean. It would be better if he just passed out, at least then he wouldn't suffer so much. Pearl didn't know what to do. Even pain medication wouldn't work. Were they truly helpless? Just then the physician arrived, indicating everyone could leave. Tell came over and helped Pearl up. The physician then took out the medicine. Pearl felt somewhat relieved that at least there was medicine available. Watching Urs suffer. Although it pained her, Pearl was powerless and had to leave with Tell. Tell clearly felt Pearl trembling. Pearl's voice quivered, "Urs will be all right, won't he?" Tell slowly spoke, "Uncle can help ease some of his pain." Pearl paused before looking up. "Are you saying this condition can't be cured completely? Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" You knew about Urz's condition but didn't tell me. Faced with Pearl's questioning, Tell lowered his head and remained silent. Pearl understood. Since she would leave this family sooner or later, there was no need to tell her, right? Back in her room, Pearl wept. She hadn't realized Urz's condition was so severe. So this explained everything, sending Urz to the countryside, giving the servants time off. It was all because of this. Pearl suddenly felt that if she had known this would happen, she would rather have watched Urz endure loneliness than see this. Walking out of her room, Pearl met Celsia. Celsia managed a weak smile. Urz will get better. Do you have time now? This family was cursed. Everyone's blood carried poison that could kill with just one drop. Although Pearl knew this, hearing it still shocked her every time. Celsia's expression grew serious. I once thought about breaking free from this curse's shackles. Our family's curse isn't inherited through females, only through males. So if a woman became the head of the family, perhaps the curse couldn't continue. But ridiculously, they feared having a woman as the family head more than the curse itself. They said there were no women in the family's direct lineage, but that was just their excuse. Weren't the women from branch families still family members? Although there was a way to break the curse, those stubborn people wouldn't agree. The curse continued until now, and I don't know what purpose it served. Later, my brother, the family heir, died. I saw a future in my child, so I decided to inherit the title. I thought when my child succeeded, the family could break free from the curse. Looking back now, it was just a foolish dream. I killed my husband and child. My husband was a merchant whom I met by chance. We were equally matched in all negotiations, and finally we married. But in the end, I destroyed everything. Celsia could never forget that evening when she returned home to find her husband and child collapsed on the ground. Her first thought was the curse. She quickly checked her own body. Had she been injured? Countless memories flashed through her mind. That day, her child had asked, "Mom, don't you feel stuffy wearing gloves all the time? I feel uncomfortable wearing them even for a short while. Why don't you take them off?" Then he removed Celsia's gloves. And there had been a small wound on her hand. Celsia was devastated. The two people she loved most had left her. Her son and husband had left her because of this cursed curse. Without them, what meaning did all her efforts have? Celsia spoke slowly. I know how much courage it took for you to come to this place. Actually, I was very suspicious of you at first, but now I see I misjudged you. And thank you for saving me on the street earlier. Then they smiled at each other, their relationship having made a breakthrough. At this moment, Pearl was still worried about Urz, wondering if he was feeling better. Tell mentioned that Urz had been moved to another room. Then asked Pearl to follow him. Pearl walked with her head down, silently. Last night Tell hadn't returned to their room, and thinking about yesterday's events still made her uncomfortable. Tell broke the silence. What you did was very dangerous. And I should apologize to you. I just thought it would be better if you didn't know about this. Pearl could hardly believe it. The high and mighty Grand Duke was actually apologizing to her. She didn't respond to that, instead asking about Urz's condition. Tell spoke slowly. Urz is almost better now. Why are you so concerned about him? Pearl lowered her head even more. Urz is my friend. Since the day he arrived at the Grand Duke's house, Urz had always been on her side. Pearl wanted Urz to do what he wanted and to be happy. But now it seemed that hoping to see Urz live happily was just her fantasy. Days passed and Urz still lay in bed, clearly unwell. Pearl approached the bedside after receiving permission. She brushed Urz's hair away from his face. Urz's eyes opened slightly and he unconsciously called out, "Mother." When he realized it was Pearl, he panicked, quickly sitting up and insisting he was fine. He apologized to Pearl beside him, saying it was his fault for frightening the Duchess. Then he burrowed under the covers, refusing to say another word. They both knew Urz was thinking of painful memories, so they left the room together. Pearl turned to Tell and asked if Urz would still be able to attend the academy. Tell didn't refuse, saying everything would depend on Urz's recovery, but for now there was something more important, meeting with Uncle. Pearl studied the long-haired man before her. So this was Phineas? Looking at him now, the family members really did look alike. Phineas didn't waste time with pleasantries and got straight to the point. He had originally thought Pearl's blood was unusual and might contain antibodies. But research showed there was nothing in her blood, meaning Pearl's blood was no different from an ordinary person's. Everyone present was stunned. Phineas could only say he would continue his research, as it remained a mystery why their family's blood had no effect on Pearl. Therefore, from today onwards, Phineas would stay at the Duke's mansion to observe Pearl. Celsia slowly stood up, saying she was tired and needed to leave. Before leaving, she gave Pearl a radiant smile, which left everyone stunned once again. 3 days later, the servants returned. Rebecca looked at Pearl's tired smile and had an ominous feeling. The next moment, she cheerfully said that because of the festival, the streets were very lively, so she had a great time. To cheer Pearl up, Rebecca invited her to attend the festival. However, upon leaving the mansion, Pearl apologized. She had plans with her friends today. Though they were shocked by her sudden visit after the marriage, everyone was happy about Pearl's marriage. After all, her husband was the handsome Grand Duke. Although they felt slightly miffed, everyone was still delighted about Pearl's marriage. After all, she had married the handsome Grand Duke himself. They then began gossiping, and ultimately Pearl's plan to gather information about the outside world wasn't successful. She only learned that her stepmother often attended parties. At least her friends still supported her as always, which was a kind of happiness. After chatting with her friends, Pearl decided to walk around more with Rebecca. She also bought gifts for Urs, hoping he would like them. Looking at the items in her hands, Pearl suddenly remembered there was another matter to resolve. Lately, Tell often tried to make conversation with her, but Pearl always unconsciously avoided him. This couldn't continue. She needed to have a proper talk with Tell. At this moment, the elite knight who had been following them said he had business to attend to and needed to leave. Pearl didn't think much of it. Rebecca hesitantly spoke up beside her. Though this might be improper, I still want to ask if you're still troubled by the rumors outside. I have a friend in social circles who might be able to help you. Would you like to meet him with me? So they walked together into an alley. But there was no one there. Sensing something was wrong, Pearl wanted to leave. But she discovered Rebecca had disappeared. With no choice, Pearl went to look for her. But what she didn't expect was that her search would reveal a familiar figure. The Grand Duke, who usually maintained an icy expression, now showed anxiety and worry on his face, because his young wife was in danger. After receiving the elite knight's return message, Tell knew Pearl was in trouble. His intuition proved correct. After rescuing Pearl, Tell carefully supported her. Nearby, Sif was unwilling to give up, shouting Pearl's name. His voice echoed in Pearl's mind like a demon's. Her hands trembled involuntarily. Tell's face also showed a terrifying expression. The next moment, with a swift strike, Sif let out an ear-piercing scream. Back in the room, Pearl was still worried about those who had come with her. Tell told her to rest well and not worry. Then he sat down nearby. After much hesitation, Pearl finally spoke. How did you find me? Tell answered calmly, the guards in the area had seen you. With their help and because I found your glove, I was able to locate you quickly. Pearl then asked, go handle your affairs, aren't you busy? I only have minor injuries. But when Tell was about to leave, he still saw her trembling shoulders. Tell finally walked out, leaving Pearl alone in the room. She finally let her tears fall silently. Why did these things keep happening to her? Compared to them, the inheritance meant nothing to her. She would even willingly give up the inheritance, so why did they have to go to such extremes? Pearl questioned her life. What was she really striving for? What was all this effort for? She had foolishly wanted them to regret their actions, wanted them to realize what a mistake it was to try to kill her. But she was the only fool all along. Those people had never loved her. Pearl unconsciously began twirling her fingers again, something she always did when scared. This reminded her of her once gentle stepmother, who would hold her tenderly when she was afraid, comforting her to sleep to prevent nightmares. But now it seemed that past warmth was fake, everything was just groundwork laid to seize the inheritance. In another room, the man before them was beaten until pale, while Tell gazed darkly out the window, wondering what had happened to Pearl. The noble lady who had always obeyed him had stubbornly married the Duke and driven him from the mansion. Unable to be a kept man anymore, he had desperately kidnapped Pearl. When Pearl came to her senses, she found herself tied up. Sif slowly approached. You've made me wait so long. It's so hard to see you. Elite knights aren't something only you can arrange. I advise you not to scream, or I don't know what might happen. Pearl worriedly looked at the unconscious Rebecca. At that time, Rebecca had selflessly stood in front of her to let her escape. Now she needed to use her power to protect everyone. Pearl spoke coldly, let the others go. Sif snarled, this isn't the time for that. Tell me why you abandoned me. Was my proposal really that bad? Is it because I don't have a title, or because I'm just an ordinary knight? So you just played with me? After holding it in for so long, Pearl finally spoke those words, because I knew once I married you, you would try to kill me. After being stunned, Sif became nervous. What nonsense are you talking about? Even if something like that happened, it must have been because you did something wrong. Seems you still don't understand the situation. I know you came here to meet this man. Who is he, your new lover? Looks like even the Great Duke can't satisfy you. This blonde, blue-eyed man was familiar to Pearl. He was the friend Rebecca had mentioned before. Sif's behavior became more excessive as he taunted. So you like men like this? He's a noble, isn't he? Quite the presentable face too. People like you are completely clueless. The man couldn't help but laugh at these words. This action thoroughly angered Sif, who raised his knife to stab the man's face. Pearl anxiously called for him to stop. What do you really want? Do you want to be a knight or do you want money? Sif released the man and turned to Pearl. Don't I deserve all of these things? Marry me. Just sign this and I'll let them go. Pearl was stunned. In Sif's hand was a temple contract. Once submitted, a temple contract couldn't be revoked. If Pearl signed this contract now, her contract with Tell would become worthless. Sif threatened her from the side. The Countess wanted to harm you, but I stopped her. I'm the one who cares about you most. I'm giving you a chance. You don't want them all to die, do you? Left with no choice, Pearl had to sign the contract. But the next moment, a large hand smashed Sif's head against the wall. He went flying. Without a doubt, the person who came was Tell, and this man's face was like frost. He was furious now because his young wife had been hurt. The knight who had been beaten half to death kept apologizing, saying it was his negligence that had put Pearl in danger. In the end, Tell didn't execute that night, but walked out of the room. Suddenly he saw Urs. Urs felt very guilty, believing Pearl's increasingly thin figure was because of him. Tell comforted Urs, saying Pearl was fine that day, so there was no need to worry. Then he turned to the butler, asking about the whereabouts of that contract. The butler shook his head, saying that although he had sent people to inquire at the temple, there was still no news, and they hadn't found the contract on either the alley or Sif. Tell spoke slowly. Is this all the information you have? How do you plan to handle it? Meanwhile, at Baron Bosun's house, everything was in chaos. Rebecca was now very excited and angry. I did everything as you said, but this happened. I was even locked in a single room until just now and underwent interrogation. Even to come out for a short while, I had to write a guarantee. It was only after my repeated requests that they agreed to accompany me. Bosun was embarrassed. Miss Rebecca, please calm down. You're troubling me. I didn't expect things to turn out this way either. For a common knight to be so audacious, but thinking carefully, this isn't my fault. I was waiting for you when I was captured. The messenger who helped me relay messages says he's too scared to continue. Rebecca slammed the table in rage. Then why did you send that knight away? Anyone would think you had some secret to discuss with the Duke's daughter-in-law. If the Duke hadn't arrived in time, something terrible would have happened. Bosun seemed unconcerned. That incident was indeed strange. I didn't expect the Duke would come looking for her personally. Rebecca's veins bulged in anger. What was wrong with this person's attitude? Did he really not understand what he did wrong? Though she was grateful to him for recommending her as a maid, if Bosun still wouldn't admit his mistakes, they shouldn't meet anymore. She was already walking on eggshells living in the Duke's house. Fortunately, she hadn't been thrown out because of this. Bosun didn't want to listen to Rebecca's complaints. After they all left, Bosun fell into deep thought, wondering what was so special about that woman. Pearl's heart tightened. Since her mother's death, her father's health had grown even weaker. But even in that state, he hadn't neglected the family affairs that her mother had managed. If she gave up now, her parents' careful nurturing of the family would be wasted. And she truly had nothing left now. Pearl silently made up her mind. She absolutely couldn't fall here. However, it was strange why Tell kept following her. In the carriage, they stared at each other awkwardly. Tell broke the silence first. Didn't I say I would help you handle those matters? Pearl lowered her head and apologized, as that contract would surely cause losses for the Duke's family. Tell said it didn't matter. The perpetrator had been executed, and the contract was just a piece of paper. But I heard you picked out a gift for Urs, so I should give one too. Why don't you come help me choose? Pearl couldn't refuse. Besides, since that incident, she hadn't dared to go out to the streets alone, but this time with Tell it should be safe. As for gifts, Pearl felt Urs would be happy with whatever he received. Tell shifted his gaze from Pearl to the window. The family doctor had mentioned that Pearl wasn't in good health, possibly due to mental stress. He wondered what had actually happened to her. Soon they arrived at the shop. However, when the shopkeeper saw Tell, his jaw nearly dropped. Pearl quickly pulled him away. Throughout their journey, they received many stares. The main reason was that Tell, in an attempt to avoid recognition, had disguised himself, and the result was rather conspicuous. Pearl debated internally whether to remind him, but she wasn't that familiar with Tell. After some internal struggle, Pearl pulled him into an alley. "You're too conspicuous like this. Could you lower your head a bit? Your hair needs to be fixed." For better disguise, Pearl even bought glasses. Tell showed great interest in shopping, wanting to look at and ask about everything, to the point where Pearl wondered internally if he had never been shopping before. Finally, during a break, Pearl suddenly realized this street was familiar. On the last day of the festival, the king and Tell would parade through this street. In her previous life, Pearl hadn't seen it, having returned home early with Sif, followed by the moment of her death. At this time, Tell slowly spoke, "I have something to tell you." However, faced with such a grand parade, Pearl couldn't help but worry. The royal parade was the final activity of this festival, taking place in the late afternoon. The king, queen, and royal children walked at the front. Tell and Pearl followed behind. Pearl looked at the massive crowd ahead. Suddenly she saw a familiar figure. Wasn't that Rena standing next to the princess? Why did she have to run into her today? At this moment, Tell came to Pearl's side. There might be assassins during this parade. The purpose of holding this festival was to clean up rebel remnants. Though they're called rebels, that's not really the case. They're after me, so you might get caught up in it. But I can promise you I won't let you get hurt. Soon the parade began and Pearl quickly scanned the crowd. She soon locked her gaze on Bosun. Wasn't that Rebecca's friend? But before she could think further, an explosion occurred around them. Fortunately, Tell reacted quickly and held Pearl steady. As smoke filled the area, a vicious man broke through, lunging at Pearl with a knife. At this crucial moment, Tell blocked him in time, then kicked the assassin flying. As the assassin was sent flying, Knight Raymond immediately pounced on him, pinning him down with no chance to resist. Once the assassin couldn't move his limbs, he started using his mouth. "You filthy imperial people. You think a few words can make me submit? One day I'll make you page." Tell paid no attention to this, simply wiping the blood from his face with a handkerchief. He stated that the parade could stop now as more assassins would surely appear. However, the king's subordinate said that was impossible, as the parade was the king's order. With no choice, the parade had to continue. Pearl wanted to comfort Tell, but she noticed something wrong with the assassin's condition. He was clutching his chest in pain. This scene seemed familiar to Pearl. Even after the parade ended, Pearl remained dazed. What had happened to that person? Suddenly, huge fireworks burst in the sky outside the window, exactly like the scene on the day she died. Past memories flooded back. Pearl collapsed to the ground and slowly spoke. "My lord, may I ask you something?"